almost 4 years later. And after reviewing every single Jackbox, we're finally doing that ranking video I promised. You're probably looking at that title thinking, 54 games? There's 10 packs, and each pack has 5 games, so shouldn't that be 50 games? Well, there's Drawful 2, which was a sequel to a party pack game, but was only ever released as a standalone. You got Fibbage 3 and 4's Enough About You, which I only think is fair to count as its own separate game, because not only is it structured differently, after all, you're going from a 3-round game in the traditional Fibbage games, to a 1 or 2-round game, complete with a unique final round, or no final round depending on the version of Enough About You being played, but you're also turning a pop culture trivia game into a socially driven line game about how well you know your friends. And then there's Quicksort Forever, which plays out way differently than its original counterpart. Quicksort is a competitive 2-team game that ends after 3 rounds, while Forever is entirely cooperative, no longer has a round structure, and now has a lose condition met when filling up your board, much like Tetris. Of course, quiplash has custom prompts, Drawful Animate has friend prompts, and even Pull Mine has that mode where the second team is the entire audience watching your stream. But none of these modes change the actual structure of the game. Same amount of rounds, same win conditions, more or less the same games. Fibbage, EAY, and Quicksort Forever are the only modes I'd argue transform the game into something else entirely, which is why they're being counted separately. Counting anything else, like say, Dictionarium's slang phrase game as a separate game, just seems silly to me. Having said that, 54 games means I'm going to try to keep it brief. So at any point, if you think I'm being way too vague about why I do or don't like a game, I would highly recommend just watching the full review of whichever Jackbox party pack has the current game I'm talking about. I go super in-depth in those videos. Links to all of them in the description. Enough exposition. This may be my favorite party game series of all time, but we gotta start somewhere. Let's jump in with what I believe to be the worst Jackbox game. Number 54, Zeepeldome. A cooperative 6-player game where you slingshot your astronaut to kill enemies on the board. Considering you need to connect to the Jackbox servers, so those servers can update what your astronaut is actually doing, there's an inherent lag to this game, which makes it near impossible to play over Discord, and actually impossible over a streaming service like Twitch since you need to be able to react to things in real time. Zeepeldome has great visuals, great music, and overall you can tell a lot more effort was put into this opposed to some other games further down this list, but ultimately it deserves the last place spot simply due to the fact that it's so tedious. I can never get anyone to finish a single game. In fact, I don't think I've ever gotten through a single Zeeple session where at least one person wasn't asking me to stop midway and switch to something better. Something like Word Spud might be bad, but people will actually see it through to the end. Whereas from my experience, people are asking me to play anything else only 2 or 3 waves into Zeepeldome. Speaking of Word Spud though, number 53, Word Spud. Word Spud is a game where you sent a word like hair, then need to add a word onto it like ball, making the word hairball. The word you added is then sent to someone else, and that's the entirety of Word Spud. The like or dislike voting leads to an incredibly flawed point system, and I found that the game is most fun when you ignore the rules entirely and creates a long-winded ongoing narrative. My friends and I have mild amusement playing that way, but it's not enough to categorize Word Spud as good. Number 52, Licewater. Easily the most uninspired trivia game. Licewater gives you a statement, and then you need to vote on whether it's true or false, receiving points on whether or not you correctly guessed it was true or false. Licewater is short and fast-paced, which makes sitting through a game pretty manageable. The popcorn-style trivia blurbs make the game slightly interesting despite the uninspired premise, but you can achieve a similar experience by just googling 100 interesting facts. It's most known these days as the Jackbox game with the highest player cap in the entire series, a whopping 100, which is truly insane. But when a game is more infamous for the amount of players it supports opposed to the game itself, well, that says a lot about the actual game. Number 51, The Devils and the Details. Devils holds the honor of being my longest segment throughout all my Jackbox reviews I've done. There's a lot to say about it, and it's hard to summarize its problems in one fell swoop. The idea is that you and your friends are a family of devils that all need to finish chores around the house. A fun premise, and the co-op stuff is cool, but the majority of the game is the equivalent of jingling keys in front of a child. It is also an extremely exploitable game. Trying to keep it brief for the sake of this ranking video, I'll just say yes, there is a very specific, very deceptive winning playstyle for this game. Conceptually cool, presented well with tons of personality, but Devils is unbalanced, exploitable, and mostly mindless since the only thing on your screen that actually matters is a small line of text at the top. Swipe left, swipe right, do nothing. That is the game. But if you really care, just check out the Pack 7 review for the full breakdown. I rated this higher than Word Spud and Licewater because Devils is clearly the game that had more effort put into it. But truth be told, I would rather play Word Spud or Licewater due to how brief those games are. Number 50, Pixie Text. Often compared to Word Spud, which is a good sign. Pixie Text sees you and your friends simultaneously responding to the same text message with the gimmick that you can't erase anything you've typed. Other than players voting for which words they like, there is next to no structure and 9 out of 10 times results in unintelligible word salad. It's unfortunate because Pixie Text has some great presentation, but the experience is really no different from you and your friends all f***ing around in the same Google Docs. So you can save yourself $35 if you really want to try it out.
Let me ask you this, Jordan.
Yeah.
Is this the worst Jackbox game?
Number 49, Earwax. Quiplash is often unfairly reduced to a Cards Against Humanity clone, whereas Earwax actually is. One by one, a player is selected to be the judge, a prompt is presented, and the other players respond with the 2 of 6 sounds they've been given. The judge decides on which pair of sounds resulted in the best response, awarding a player for points, and first to 3 points wins. Some sounds are blatantly better than others, giving certain players an unfair advantage. And my biggest laughs I've had playing this aren't even from the game, but simply funny people quipping outside the game.
Canadian argument.
That's an American argument.
Number 48, Weapons Drawn. Stepping up to the 2-star games. These are games that almost work, but are less than the sum of their parts due to a few unfortunate design choices. The perfect way to describe Weapons Drawn, in fact, because this is a very ambitious game. Up to 8 players all play the role of both detectives and murderers as you kill a party guest, and try to figure out who killed the others. Everyone has a calling card, which is a letter pulled from their username, and to find the killer, you need to find the letter in someone's art. With the amount of moving pieces Weapons Drawn has doing, you might think this is actually a super in-depth social deduction game, but the reality is that Weapons Drawn is little more than a game where everybody draws a picture and you have to figure out who drew what. It's bloated with so many rules and fine details that make it much more confusing than it needs to be. And truthfully, yeah, my biggest problem with the game is once you do fully understand every last detail of Weapons Drawn, not only is there not much to it, but there's too many ways to be exploitative. You have to really please people and make sure they're playing it the quote-unquote right way. You gotta make sure people keep their username short so their calling card isn't impossible to deduce. You gotta make sure people don't write on their picture as a cheap way to hide their actual letter. You gotta make sure people don't scribble all over their drawing. Hell, there's no incentive to draw what the game's telling you to draw, so you gotta make sure people are actually drawing the right thing. Not to mention, Weapons Drawn is a drawing game where you're basically incentivized to draw as shitty as possible, since if people can tell it's your art simply based off the way you draw, they won't even need to find your calling card. Super cool conceptually, but very flawed in execution. 47, Civic Doodle. 2 players doodle something, the other players vote on which one they like more, and the winning drawing then becomes a template for the next 2 players. Everyone gets a few goes, and then you name the abomination you've all created. It's a drawing game completely reliant on its ability to be comedic, but rarely succeeds. The problem is the shock value that makes other good comedy games so funny just isn't here. A piece of art can only be so funny when you're watching it slowly be unraveled in front of you. Odds are you're already gonna know where someone is taking their picture before they even finish drawing it. It's like knowing the punchline to a joke before it's told. That's obviously going to lessen the impact of the joke. The best part of the game, oddly enough, is being able to name the monstrosity everyone has created. From my experience, it always results in the biggest and sometimes the only laughs of the entire play session. Kind of a lucky accident given the larger focus is the drawing. Also, the game bugs out a lot and the host is really annoying.
Oh, you remember? They live down by the gravy factory. You know, the river of gravy.
Shut up! Number 46, Hypnotorious. There's nothing that upsets me more than this game being a dud, because my god, what a great premise. Everyone is given a secret role that is part of 1 of 3 groups. So if your role is, say, Christmas Tree, a part of the broader category of Christmas, you gotta find the other people with roles like Christmas Lights or Snowman that will also be a part of that Christmas category. The catch of this game, and what makes Hypnotorious really unique in comparison to other social deduction games, is that there is an outlier category with a single player, and not even the outlier will know if it's them. So the whole game is about figuring out who is who, and whether or not you're the outlier. Easier said than done because you don't know any of the groups. All you know is your role. And so many of these roles and categories are either way too specific or way too vague. Like the time my 2 categories were L and M, as in words that start with the letter L or words that start with the letter M. You find out who's who by answering questions in character of whatever your role is. But there's too much of an incentive to enter joke submissions or be vague, since the only thing that matters is figuring out who everyone is for yourself. It's not like you get points for people knowing what you are. In fact, the opposite is true if you're the outlier, since the outlier gets more points if people can't figure out who they are. Hypnotorious is the equivalent of someone walking in with a freshly baked cake, and then falling over, splattering the cake all over the room. Like, what the f***? It could have been so good, but instead, it's this incoherent mess. Poorly explained, poorly executed, and also it's nearly a half-an-hour game despite it only being 2 rounds. Such a cool idea for a game, but very flawed. Number 45, Junktopia, a game where you click on a PNG and then you write 2 short text blurbs about it. Presumably a presentation game, but considering all you're doing is writing 2 little quips, and those quips are presented on screen in text, you could basically get through a whole game of this muted. Bit of a red flag if we are categorizing this as a presentation game. Jackbox categorizes it as a quote, out loud play game. Odd terminology, but that label does seem to imply this is a presentation game, in which case I believe this to be the worst one. Second worst presentation game though is Jokeboat, positioned as a stand-up comedy game, which is honestly a great idea for a Jackbox game, by the way. The problem with Jokeboat is that the template for writing jokes is way too restrictive. Also, something I can't believe I didn't mention in my Pack 6 review is just how few joke setups there even are. If you play certain Jackbox games enough, you'll start to recognize prompts or questions you've seen before. However, in Jokeboat, all it takes is playing the same game twice to see the same setups you saw last game. I mean, sure, you'll hopefully have different punchlines every time given you're not playing with robots, but in a game where you're already being heavily restricted, the repetition is the final nail in the coffin for me and my friend groups. Number 43, Bracketeering, a word entry quiplash styled game where everybody enters a submission to a prompt, and then the winning submissions rise the tournament ladder, hence the bracket title in Bracketeering. Up to 16 players, which is a plus, but ultimately the problem is, while a bracket system is a good way to find the best submissions out of multiple entries, it certainly isn't a good system for the sake of comedy. Later rounds mix it up by having mystery prompts or changing the prompt every bracket, but a submission can only be so funny when you see it 3 times in a row. Number 42, Bidiots, a cool idea for a game. Bidiots has you and your friends drawing the provided prompt for said drawings to then get auctioned off with everyone else bidding on them. Every drawing has an assigned monetary value, and you're let in on the value of 3 out of 12 art pieces. The idea is many prompts players will get will be similar, so if someone is told to draw paper money, someone else might be told to draw cash money. How do you know what's what? Well, you don't. It's just a giant guessing game. And truth be told, even if you were told the value of all 12 art pieces, there would still be no way to guarantee which is which. The problem I have with Bidiots is that all its perceived depth immediately vanishes the second you start deconstructing its core elements. Similar to a problem I have with Weapons Drawn, this is essentially a drawing game where you are rewarded for being a bad artist. Except I'd argue it's even a bigger problem here. If you get a prompt and do a damn fine job making sure it's super legible, like to the point where it couldn't possibly be mistaken for another prompt, you basically shoot yourself in the foot, because if it turns out your drawing was assigned a low value, everyone is going to know not to bid on it. Whereas if you have a chicken scratch that's vague as shit and can be mistaken for 3 or so prompts, it's basically guaranteed your drawing will look like at least one prompt that is worth a lot. Bidiots is very similar to Weapons Drawn in that it's a very cool game conceptually that is ultimately too easy to exploit. It has strategy too shallow despite having a lot of moving pieces players need to learn. It almost works though. I think it could be a great game if fully realized. Number 41, Split the Room. 3-star games. These are respectable games that are by no means bad, but I wouldn't boot up a party pack just to play them, which is unfortunate in the case of Split the Room because much like many of the other games ranked this low, this is a really cool idea for a game. You and all your friends are writing would you rathers, and the more split the vote is on your hypothetical, the more points you get. I love hypotheticals, so the idea of constructing a game around them sounds like it'd be a fantastic beacon for discussion. The problem is that the format only results in yes or no responses, railroading you into very specific submissions in order to fit the context of the provided setup. In other words, it's a very constrictive game that doesn't give you a lot of agency, taking a lot away from why hypotheticals are so much fun in the first place. Not a bad playthrough, but it leaves a lot to be desired. You could do a lot with a game all about stringing together elaborate hypotheticals, so hopefully we'll see the team revisit the concept again sometime in the future. Number 40, Time Jinx, a trivia game with a gimmick that all the questions are themed around the era in which certain events happened. Sounds restrictive, but they changed the format of the questions a lot to keep things interesting. Not a bad trivia game, but there's no real hook to it, and unlike some of the team's other trivia offerings, there's no other elements players can excel at. This is just straight trivia, and for that to be the case, the presentation needed to be a lot more compelling to stand out from its peers. Number 39, The Wheel of Enormous Proportions. Another trivia game, but this one is presented super well. The trivia is super fast-paced, probably has the best question format since most of them make it near impossible for cheaters to Google shit up mid-game, and the host is a giant egocentric wheel, one of my favorite hosts in the series.
Are you stunned by my glorious, enormous presence? Don't insult your host, just say yes.
The problem is the majority of the game is based off the title's namesake, the wheel itself. Just a bunch of RNG, baby. People who don't like trivia likely won't enjoy it because it'll feel like you're going from one RNG segment to the next, and people who do like trivia likely won't enjoy it because they'll feel like their accomplishments are being diminished by randomness. The Wheel of EP does a lot of things very well, but ultimately I feel like its appeal is pretty limited. Number 38, Dictionarium, a quiplash style game where everyone works together to create some made-up word of its own definition and everything. The thing that makes this game interesting is the process of crafting that word. Really, that's the appeal of the game. Seeing the complete dictionary entry you and your friends come up with by the end. I wish your words were saved to your hard drive opposed to the Jackbox servers, because all the dictionary entries you and your friends have made get wiped pretty fast. Otherwise, Dictionarium is the most aggressively average game in Jackbox's lineup. If you were to remove the dictionary angle, all you'd be left with is a sort of dry game of quiplash. Number 37, Madverse City, one of the coolest premises for a Jackbox game. You and all your friends are giant robots having sick-ass rap battles in this destroyed city. The format is very Mad Libs-esque, asking you to first enter a noun, adjective, or verb, and then writing whatever you want for the second line. It's not uncommon I'll see something I said dismiss because it's quote, just not for me. An unfair assumption I often reject because in most cases, the premise of a specific game I didn't like should have been right up my alley. But in in the case of Mad vs. City, I fully accept that, yeah, this just isn't my thing, and that's not the game's fault. That's not to say Mad vs. City is objectively flawless, however. The whole upvote or downvote system is an absolutely terrible inclusion because in many of the games I've played, there will be some dip mass disliking every rap, resulting in all these booing sounds that can really skew the judgment of more impressionable players. An especially annoying feature since the person in question can cowardly hide behind the design choice of the game not telling you who's downvoting raps. Then there's the TTS, which is so bad, cutting out mid-sentence or f***ing up rhymes mispronouncing things, that many of the game's biggest fans will straight up tell you to play if it turned off. And I think the big thing for me is that Madverse requires way more effort than something like quiplash, but rarely results in way more laughs. The effort to comedy ratio here is just not high enough. It's not like some other games where you and your friends can just f*** around and still yield some hearty laughs. If you want some good memorable rhymes, you gotta really try with this one. And let's be honest here, if you're a certified white guy, you're loading up Rhyme Zone whenever you play this game. That being said, if a Jackbox game about rap battle sounds like your thing, it likely will be. Number 36, TKO2. Up to 8 people draw pictures, write slogans, and then slap the two together to make the best damn t-shirts they can muster, with the winner being the creator of the single best t-shirt. The sequel to the fan favorite originally in Pack 3 is, as far as I'm concerned, not as good as the original. The drawing tools have been improved, and the second round lets you edit someone else's art, which are nice additions. Those aside, the two things that hold the sequel back is, firstly, the newly introduced bracket system. Bracketeering is not a great game for the sake of comedy simply due to the fact that seeing the same joke multiple times is going to have diminishing returns. And now that problem has been introduced into TKO. In the original, you're seeing something new every single matchup, which keeps things funny and fresh. In the sequel, you see everything there is to see halfway through the round, and then are just silently and systematically voting for the best one once repeats start showing up. The other thing is the final round has been reduced to just a button mashing contest. Also, very reminiscent of bracketeering in fact. At a glance, TKO2 may seem like the superior version, but from my own experience, people tend to have more fun playing the original. Number 35, Rumoring. A 9-player game, weird cap, where you all see yourselves playing the role of roommates under the same roof, a la Big Brother, answering questions and playing by your role. It's a game that is much more style than it is substance. For Rumoring to be truly great, it needed to lean more into its role-playing elements or its reality TV show elements. The reality TV show stuff is a bit of an afterthought. You quote-unquote vote players out, but all that really amounts to is voting on which player you want to lose points. Nobody actually gets kicked out. As for the role-playing stuff, you decide on your role at the start of the game with stuff like yoga instructor, abusive drinker, whatever you want really, but it's more of a suggestion than anything. It's weird to me people will claim that this is the feature that really defines Rumoring when the feature isn't actually implemented into the game in any meaningful way. There's absolutely nothing binding you to your role, no score incentive or anything. As such, many players will just ignore their role entirely and just enter whatever they think is the funniest. You know, just like any other word entry game. All that they needed was something as simple as a round where you vote for who played by their assigned role the best. Without anything like that, all Rumoring boils down to is a really long game of quiplash, like half an hour long. Because really, you can roleplay in Joke Boat, you can roleplay in Mad vs. City, you can roleplay in Monster Seeking Monster, there's nothing stopping you from roleplaying in basically any text entry or presentation game. Without any actual gameplay integration of the roles, I have a hard time viewing the role-playing angle as a strength of Rumoring. Take out the self-inflicted role-playing, and the only thing Rumoring has left going for it is the, admittedly, very well done presentation and a fun host. A decent enough game, but it could have been great had it been less quiplash and more game show or role-playing game. Number 34, You Don't Know Jack 2015, is a pop culture trivia game of a ton of personality. You got a snarky host, and the whole thing with YDKJ is that the questions are typically asked in the most roundabout way possible, like asking what temperature Olaf from Frozen would melt and die opposed to simply asking what temperature ice melts. As flashy as the trivia is, YDKJ is just straight trivia with no other gimmicks. So if you're indifferent to trivia like I am, you'll probably prefer the games that mix in other elements players can excel at like Fibbage or Trivia Murder Party. But if you do like trivia, you'll probably like You Don't Know Jack. I mean, it's pretty much where these guys got their start. The first version of YDKJ dating all the way back to 1995. So it's definitely a tried and true formula. This version in the first party pack is held back by the 4-player cap and the fact it's not a stream-friendly game during the last round when players need to quickly react to what they're seeing on the screen. Thankfully, number 33, You Don't Know Jack full stream addresses both those issues. Up to 8 players now, and with new accommodations that cater to people who might be playing over Discord or Twitch. I think the only thing the 2015 version did better is pacing. Full stream adds this binge pipe gag where your whole game of You Don't Know Jack is being presented through some evil streaming service. Good for a chuckle, but otherwise not worth the additional interruptions and transitions. Even still, I do think this is overall the marginally better version between the two. Number 32, Quicksort. Sporting up to 10 players, this is one of the few team-based Jackbox games and is essentially Trivia Tetris. When your team is up, you'll get a prompt like, candy calories. Get the names of a bunch of candies, with the idea being that you want to put them in the correct order from least calories to most calories. A really cool idea for a game, and it being team-based adds a lot to the social aspect effect despite it being a trivia game, because the whole time everyone is like yelling over each other trying to direct team members on where to place things. I love the premise and it is fun, but the big thing that holds this vanilla version of Quicksort back is the overall pacing. I have 5 different recordings of this game on my hard drive, and all of them are hovering around 28 minutes. It doesn't help that when the opposing team is up, you have absolutely no reason to pay attention to what they're doing. In some other games like Pull Mine, listening in during your opponent's turn is just as important as paying attention on your turn because you need to get an idea of what everyone voted for. In Quicksort, each team gets completely separate prompts, so you could literally leave the room for a whole 3 minutes or so and miss absolutely nothing when the other team is up. Cool game, but there's a reason I consider Quicksort Forever to be its own experience entirely, and why this, in comparison, is a 3 out of 5. Number 31, Monster Seeking Monster. Up to only 7 players, which is kind of a bummer. Monster Seeking Monster is basically a secret identity strategy game that sees everyone assuming the role of a secretly assigned monster and going out on dates with each other. There's 6 nights, and during each, everyone texts each other to set up a date. If you and another player both choose to date each other, you're both rewarded a heart, which is this game's version of points. Where the strategy comes in is with the secretly assigned monsters everyone got. At the end of each round, the player in first has their monster revealed, and can range from things like the ghost that will steal a point from players that reject them, to the body swapper that will swap all their points with anyone they date on a full moon. So you definitely want to be careful of who you do or don't date. If I would have made this list a few years back, I likely would have ranked it a lot higher. The problem that I have is that the more that I play it, the more I realize how incredibly unbalanced the monsters are. The infamous example is the zombie. Every person the zombie dates becomes a zombie, and then every person that person dates also becomes a zombie. If every player is a zombie by the end of all 6 nights, which is very easy to do given the max player cap is 7, the zombie player wins regardless of everyone's final scores. Absolutely broken. On the opposite side of the spectrum is the mummy, who is just terrible. Similar to the zombie, every person you date becomes cursed, which then spreads to everyone they date. You steal a heart for every cursed player, which would be great was it not for the fact that if everyone gets cursed, which much like the zombie is very likely, the curse is lifted and you get nothing. Basically, if you're a mummy and get revealed, the game just ended for you right there because no one is going to want to date you. Players who haven't dated you won't date you because they don't want to lose points, and players who did date you won't want a second date because they'd rather you date someone else in order to lift the curse. And you know, if they're dating the mummy again, they're not spreading their curse either. Ultimately, it's the balancing issues that keep me from coming back to this one nowadays. 30, Survive the Internet. The amount of people I have met that claim this to be their absolute favorite party pack game is surprising to me. Although, to be fair, it's not as if I don't get the appeal. Basically, this is another fill-in-the-blank quiplash style game where everyone enters a response to a question, and then you take those responses and basically deep fake the out of them, making them look like they were a response to something else entirely. A really funny premise, but a very flawed one. The letter cap for answers is just way too big, resulting in sometimes getting responses like this. If you get this, what are you realistically supposed to do with it? I mean, you can try to riff off the fact you got a bad response by being like, oh man, I hope nobody leaves a brain-dead answer to my question, but that's a pretty hacky way to go about it, and even that approach isn't that funny. And that's basically the bottom line. Some players are just straight up going to have more to work with than others. It's not like Quiplash where even if you get a bad prompt, at least one other player you're competing against also got that same bad prompt. It's not even like Job where if you did get a response like this, it'd actually give you a lot of words to work with. Survive the Internet also does that thing where it will show all 8 players' responses at once, which puts too much emphasis on the last one shown and takes away attention from the first one given it was presented nearly a minute ago. There's a few other minor nitpicks I mentioned in my full review, but those are my biggest issues with the game. If it's any consolation, I think Survive the Internet is prime for a sequel. I genuinely believe it has the potential of being one of the best in the series. In its present form, it's still good, but there's other word entry games I'd rather play. Number 29, Fibbage XL, 4-star games. Now we're getting to the real good stuff. From this point forward, every game I mention is so good I booted up whichever party pack they're in just to play them. Fibbage XL, well, all the Fibbage games really, is a game where you're told a fill-in-the-blank trivia question, then think of the best lie you can to fill in that blank. Everyone's lies alongside the one real answer is thrown up on the TV, and you are awarded points for not only finding the one true answer, but for every player you fool with your lie. It's paced well, the trivia is bizarre in the best possible way, and the lying element makes Fibbage a lot more than just a trivia game. Although we've gotten 4 Fibbage games by this point, the original version is still just as fun as it ever was. But I'd still rather play number 28, Fibbage 2. A sequel game is obviously going to be similar, but there are no 2 Jackbox games more identical than Fibbage XL and Fibbage 2. Even visually, I mean like, just look at them. They just inverted the colors and called it a day. The big thing Fibbage 2 introduces is a defibrillator, a feature that removes all but one lie and the truth from your device, helping you narrow down the answer for a single question. All new questions, of course, but otherwise it's still that same great Fibbage experience. Number 27, Drawful. The best and only completely original game in Pack 1. Drawful is obviously a drawing game where you get a prompt, draw it to the best of your ability, and then everyone else looks at your drawing and try to guess what your prompt was. All their guesses guesses are displayed up on the TV alongside your actual prompt, with you receiving points for everyone who correctly guesses your prompt, and them receiving points if players instead vote for their guess. Basically think Fibbage except with drawing instead of trivia. 26. Guesspionage. This is probably the highest you will ever see anyone rank Guesspionage. It seems most fans don't think very highly of it despite every group I've played with getting decently invested. Basically you're given a question like,
what percentage of people have slept on waterbeds at least once?
And then you gotta guess on what you think that percentage is. Everyone else votes on whether they think the real percentage is higher or lower than what you said, and then the real percentage is revealed. The biggest strength of Guesspionage is that anyone, regardless of age or interest or whatever, can easily pick the game up and start talking with others about it. Every single time I load Guesspionage up, it gets everyone, whether they're playing or not, talking about the questions, their own experiences. It's surprisingly a very social game, and that's why it's great to bring to large gatherings with friends or families. The big flaw of Guesspionage is that it's very unclear on who was surveyed, where the surveys took place, when the surveys took place, and I don't think they were updated, which can make guessing kind of a crapshoot. Even still, Guesspionage is a good icebreaker game, especially if you want to get to know the people you're playing with. And if you already know the people you're playing with, then play Role Models. More of an interactive toy than a game, Role Models has up to 6 people categorizing each other into groups. If everyone playing was a fast food mascot, who would be the Ronald McDonald of the group? You know, just stupid things like that. As a game, Role Models is a bit lacking and very exploitable. You get points if your vote to as who someone is aligns with what everyone else said, but sometimes 2 people will get an even amount of votes for the same role, in which case the 2 of them will be given a personalized question based on the role they are tied for, with all the other players needing to make an additional vote for who between the 2 tied players matches that role better. The reason this is problematic from the viewpoint of Role Models being a game is because let's say you vote for one of your friends as being the Cthulhu of the group, and then they get caught in a tiebreaker. Even if the other tied player's answer ends up being better, strategically, it makes more sense to still just vote for the person you originally voted as Cthulhu, because if you vote for the other person to win that Cthulhu tiebreaker, then whatever you originally said that person should be is now automatically wrong, because they're now being assigned a role you initially said belonged to someone else. Thankfully, this isn't really a game where score really matters. It's just fun to fuck around with close friends and be like, oh yeah, you're the newborn infant of the group. The best part is at the end, it will give everyone a horoscope-esque description based on how you and your friends were all grouped. Again, not much of a game, but it's a great time with close friends. 24. Faking It, a social deduction game up to 6 players. Each round everyone gets a prompt on their phone like, raise your hand if you've ever seen Game of Thrones. One player is randomly assigned to be the faker, and they'll see nothing on their phone, needing to blend in. The objective, of course, being to find out who's the faker each round. It's a game that's meant to be played in person, although the way me and my friends get away with playing it over Discord is we all post something at the same time when the timer counts down, whether that be text saying hand raised or hand down, or an emoji for the face category. Not the intended way to play, obviously, but it's a fun workaround. The big problem of Faking It is the scoring is absolutely f***ed. If you're assigned the faker, you basically have to not get caught for all 3 of the prompts if you want to score more points than everyone else, which is a very, very hard thing to do. Definitely feels like the faker is at a disadvantage here. I still find myself coming back to this one a lot because a social deduction game where the outlier is constantly changing makes Faking It a lot less stressful than some of its contemporaries. I don't mind the more stressful social deduction stuff, but if you find something like Mafia too stressful, then you might prefer this. Number 23, Bomb Corp, a more traditional style game, often compared to Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. You and your friends are employed as bomb diffusers and need to all work together in order to prevent killing literally everyone at the office. Cut red wires, cut even numbered wires. Every player gets their own set of rules like that, and you need to all talk to each other to make sure it's all done in the right order. It's a fun cooperative game and gets some bonus points for the writing being, well, actually funny. The severity of your work is juxtaposed by the quiet office setting with your in-game coworkers complaining about trivial things like who replaces the cups in the break room.
All I'm saying is that if I take the last styrofoam cup, I open a new box, or I put in an order for more. People are so lazy.
I don't enjoy working with you.
The big complaint Bomb Corp often receives is that it's only 4 players. I like Bomb Corp, but I totally think the critique itself is valid considering if you want to play a more traditional styled game of 4 people, you have hundreds of other options outside Jackbox. Still a great game though, and my friends and I definitely had a phase where we were playing this like every day for a month. 22. Blather Round. The quickest way to describe Blather Round is that it's charades for up to 6 people. You choose a word, create a sentence to describe your word, then everyone starts guessing. You have the ability to click on someone else's guess and be like, it's bigger than that, or it's nothing like that. On my Jackbox server, I often see people playing muted, which I don't get, but I will say if you want a good everyone is muted Jackbox game, this is definitely it. Blather Round is often overlooked because it's a basic game that doesn't try to be anything more than what it is. It's not flashy, it's not intense, it's Blather Round, and the whole experience is pretty subdued. Myself personally, I think that's the strength of the game. It's a chill time, and some of my friends thought the same thing because I know people who have bought pack 7 just for Blather Round. 6-player cap though, and most other party pack entries support 8. That's the biggest setback of Blather Round in my eyes. prompts. Well, that, and also it won't take too many rounds of Blather Around to start seeing some repeat prompts. There's a lot, but not enough for Blather Around fans to not know what is or is not in the game. 21. Drawful Animate. I don't think there's any other game I've changed my opinion on so drastically. This is the good old drawful gameplay you know and love, except instead of drawing one picture, you draw 2 frames in order to create animation. My issue with the game at launch was that, beyond making the game take longer, needing to draw twice as much, a large majority of these prompts don't have verbs or actions to even make use of the second frame, and are instead something you could easily do in a single picture. Even though it's a complaint I still hold, the animation angle, whether justified or not from a design perspective, is just fun. Even though it's not the best drawful, it became my favorite one to play because making dinky little 2-frame animations is simply a good time. Also, Animate has a 10-player cap opposed to the typical 8. That alone justifies this version of the game. Number 20. TKO. The first one. The superior of the 2 TKO games in my opinion. Besides having a better final round that doesn't ask you to button mash to decide a winner, the 2 things the original does better is firstly, atmosphere. It's got this campy, radical 90s vibe going for it. The rock-inspired music alone makes for a much more lively experience. And secondly, you're always seeing something new to laugh at every single round. 2 shirts face off, a winner is decided, and then that winning shirt stays while a new shirt is dragged in. The big concern would be that if you go first, you'd have to fight your way through more shirts, giving the first runners-up a huge disadvantage, right? Well, they've countered this problem with the inclusion of the streak winner. The shirt that endured the most consecutive rounds in a row becomes a winning shirt via the streak winner award. So shirts that go first are more likely to win streak winner, and shirts that go last are more likely to win gauntlet winner. Is it a perfect system? No. But for the sake of comedy, it's a much funnier system than seeing the same shirts go away and then come back 3 times. Number 19. Quiplash XL. After mentioning Quiplash all across this video, we finally made it to our first one. Quiplash is like the big name in the Jackbox series. You don't know Jack may be where they got their start, but Quiplash is the game everybody knows and loves. It's not hard to see why either. Quiplash provides you with a prompt, and you need to respond with the funniest answer you can think of. Your answer goes up against another player who also got that prompt, and everyone else votes for the best answer between the 2. Simple, but effective. I don't think I've met a single person who didn't like Quiplash, so clearly it's a winning formula. As far as this first version is concerned, the 2 setbacks, as I see it, is firstly, the final round isn't great. Having the vote between a wall of answers is a lot less focused than the faster 2-response format that has made the series so iconic. Then there's a presentation which isn't quite as good as the future entries. To be expected, obviously, but it's enough for my friends and I to stick to 2 or 3 whenever somebody wants to play Quiplash. Number 18. Quicksort Forever. 4.5-star games. Might feel like cheating, but f it. It's my list, and there's a lot of games that are definitely better than a 4, but I can't justifiably give them perfect scores. These are games that are near perfect, but have 1 or 2 minor setbacks that keep them from genuinely being perfect. In Quicksort Forever's case, the thing holding it back is the overall pacing could definitely be sped up, much like the problem with its vanilla counterparts. And also, some of its prompts aren't exactly clear. Other than that, this is undoubtedly the preferred way to play Quicksort. Stuff like the garbage prompts in the original Quicksort don't make much sense because it sort of just eats up time. But that addition is validated in Forever because now, how much space you have on the conveyor is actually important. Block placement in general is a much more crucial element. It's weird to think of this as the extra game, when I'd argue it's a lot more tightly designed than the original Quicksort. Number 17. Fibbage 4. Why are there 4 versions of Fibbage? I don't know, but much like literally any version of Fibbage, it's still good. Thematically, they go for this abstract collage look, which certainly makes it stand out from other Jackbox games. And there's some new round categories, like this one called Cookie's VHS Vault, where they have you write a lie about a short movie clip. That being said, the thing I think does hold Fibbage 4 back slightly are the new round categories. Beyond the VHS Vault, they're overall not as interesting. And one of the categories, Fibbage Fan Fact, is a round where you have to guess what some random fan is going to say. It's a humbling inclusion as a way to give back to the fans, so to speak. But the problem I have with that round is that it's a complete guessing game. It's not like some other trivia where someone in touch of pop culture could potentially know the answer. I find this version of Fibbage unnecessary, all things considered, but it is still the second best version of the game. 16. Patently Stupid. A presentation game where you draw a product in order to solve a problem, and then pitch your creation to all the other players, complete with snazzy taglines to get the right. I'm not huge on presentation games, but this is a really neat idea for a game, and it's one that pays off considering how consistently funny sessions are. I wish the final round was stronger. It's not bad, but it has everyone creating a solution to the same exact problem, which generally means you already know what to expect from people before a single product is even presented, if not ending up with multiple people presenting the same exact solution, especially when that same solution is another gun. Final round aside, this is by far my favorite Pack 5 game. Number 15. Fibbage 3 Enough About You. Very different from standard Fibbage. Enough About You doesn't prompt you with pop culture trivia, but instead trivia about your friends. It'll ask you a dumb question like, what's the longest line you've stood in? You answer truthfully, it will ask everyone else what they they think your answer to this question was. And much like Fibbage, they get points for correctly guessing the right answer, and more points if people pick their lie. Of course, you get points when people vote for the answer you truly wrote. It's a great social twist on the Fibbage formula, and truth be told, this spin on the formula leaves it feeling like, well, not a Fibbage game at all, which is why I consider it as a separate game. Fibbage 3 Enough About You has its own unique final round where it will ask you to write a truth and a lie, with you getting points for people selecting your lie, and others receiving points for selecting your truth, essentially making the idea that you want to write something true that sounds like a lie, and a lie that sounds like it could be true. The structure of this is just way too vague and way too hard to think of on the spot, unless you thought of something beforehand. I often see people entering a bunch of bullshit during this final round. I can't blame them either, because I've also had rounds of this where I entered unimaginable bullshit when I couldn't think of anything. Make a better final round, and Fibbage Enough About You would be a easy 5 out of 5. Unfortunately, they didn't do that in Fibbage 4 Enough About You. I was really hoping they would come up with a clever final round if they ever revisited Enough About You, but instead, they flat out removed the final round altogether. Yeah, deadass. This version of EAY has no final round. I don't think it would have been too hard to come up with something. Hell, I even pitched my own idea of something they could have done in my review of Pack 9. I had a hard time deciding whether I thought Enough About You was better with a flawed final round or no final round, but ultimately I did decide I think this version of the game is ever so slightly better. Number 13, Drawful 2. At the time of this upload, the only Party Pack sequel to never actually be in a Party Pack. If you already own Drawful 1 or Animates, Drawful 2 isn't necessarily a must-buy, although I would consider it the best of the Drawfuls. I prefer the host in 2 over 1, especially since she has a better mic, the presentation is better, and it has the best pacing of the 3 Drawfuls. Just an all-around great drawing game. Number 12, Quiplash 3. The most recent iteration of Quiplash. The biggest difference is the final round. It's undeniably the best of the Quiplash series. It plays out like a standard round, except you enter 3 responses, which leads to a lot of creativity if you play into the format. Quiplash 3 also goes for this claymation look, which I personally really like. It's a really creative interpretation, and it's rendered very well. It's pretty subjective, it seems, as I've met a decent amount of people who have told me they really don't like the clay art style. Presentation-wise, the thing I don't like is the music. I find it a bit grating. The bigger problem for me, though, is 3, at least from my experience, has the weakest prompts of the 3 games. It's not exactly easy to pinpoint what does or doesn't make a good Quiplash prompt, although I'd argue being open-ended is a big one. Nonetheless, I've talked to many other owners of Pack 7, and I know I'm not alone in thinking that, on a game-to-game basis, the previous 2 Quiplash games generally had better prompts, which is why my favorite Quiplash is Quiplash 2. Great music, great presentation, great prompts. The only problem of Quiplash 2 is the final round, and yeah, it's not great. It has the same problem as Quiplash 1, where it simultaneously pits all 8 answers against each other in a sloppy wall of answers. They tried adding some variety via the different round categories, and to be fair, the Comic Clash category is sort of neat, tasking players to fill in a speech bubble, but then you got stuff like Acronym Lash, which is just, I mean, that doesn't even sound good. Acronym Lash? Who the f***'s idea was that? In a perfect Quiplash, we'd have the prompts and music of 2 with the final round of 3. But ranking what we do have, I still think that Quip 2 is the strongest of the 3. Number 10, Trivia Murder Party. Alright, we've made it to the top 10. Everyone knows Trivia Murder Party, right? It became one of their most iconic games almost immediately. Up to 8 players have been kidnapped and are being asked trivia by the insane host. If you get a question wrong, you're forced to play a minigame that can potentially kill you. Once only 1 player is left alive, it becomes a mad dash out the door of the souls of the dead players coming in hot from behind. As already stated in this video, I'm not even the biggest fan of trivia, but I absolutely love Trivia Murder Party. The killing floor minigames are a good complement to the trivia and give players who are not trivia buffs a chance at winning given they can survive them. There's not much reason to come back to this first one when the sequel perfected just about everything, but if you were to only have this original version, you and your friends are gonna have a great time regardless. Number 9, Talking Points. Hands down the best presentation game. Talking Points has you picking a presentation topic and then talking over taglines and pictures that someone else is deciding for you. The fun of the game basically comes from trying to weave a single narrative through an assortment of random pictures you're convincingly trying to make seem relevant to your topic. And really, that's the fun of the game right there. Knowing that every last person presenting is just constantly pulling out of their ass start to finish. It's really high energy, so even though I love this game, it doesn't always appeal to me if I'm in a more casual mood. You gotta really put yourself out there with this one. However, unlike Madverse, where the high effort doesn't always lead to a gut-busting laughter, I find that Talking Points often does. In fact, as long as you're willing to put in the effort, I think this is the funniest Jackbox game. The score system is a bit of an afterthought, especially with the rewards at the end where most people just use it as an excuse to cram in some extra jokes, but if you want a good presentation game, This is it right here. Number 8, Nonsensory. A game that is half writing, half drawing. Round 1 will ask you something like, write a text that is 50% drunk. You write that text, and then all of the other players vote on what percentage of drunk your text is. Rounds 2 and 3 are drawing rounds with a weird-ass prompt like, draw something that is 80% sofa and 20% dragon. Again, having your friends look at what you submitted and needing to guess what percentage you had. I already liked this game at launch, but I find myself liking it even more as time goes on. There's a handful of people online that don't care for Nonsensory, albeit throughout the many groups I've played this with in person, I haven't had a single one not enjoy this game by the end. Nonsensory is a lot of drawing, and I've still had a couple of people who have said, despite them not liking drawing games, they still really enjoy Nonsensory. The great thing about Nonsensory is that it's a drawing game where I feel that less skilled artists aren't put at too big of a disadvantage. It's more about getting the idea across than drawing a good picture. There's a lot of skill involved, and the prompts are so ridiculous. It also succeeds as a comedy game. Pacing wise, I think transitions could be sped up a bit, but to be fair, it doesn't drag on as much as some of the other Pac-9 games. I understand Nonsensory won't appeal to everyone, but it is very creative and tons of fun with my own friend groups. Number 7, The Pole Mine. Up to 10 players are split into 2 teams and are asked questions like,
what's the worst response to I love you?
Everyone selects their top picks, and then it's discussion time. Amongst everyone playing, you have to deduce what the top 3 votes were. Later rounds mix it up by having to find votes 2, 3, and 4, or finding the least popular options. But regardless of the round, this is a heavily discussion-oriented game. I love the social aspect here. I also love the strategy of trying to discuss with your team what you should vote for without giving too much away to the opposing team. It's a simple game to understand, but as far as games built on communication go, there's a lot of depth in the nuance. If you could pick the next category, this would be an easy 5 out of 5. With the current system, the next prompt is completely random, and some of these prompts are just terrible. Like, what's the worst job for a kitten? And then the answers will just be like, real jobs. Realtor, sports columnist, tax attorney? What the f***? These are terrible. When you get questions like this, it just becomes a total crapshoot because it's hard to have any sort of consensus when the question is so nebulous. A handful of these prompts are so bad, the quality of them will directly impact how good any particular session of Pole Mine is, which, if I had to guess, is why this game has its fair amount of detractors. Some bad prompts aside, Pole Mine is one of my most played Jackbox games. Not to mention, its art style is one of the best. No Jackbox game looks or even sounds like Pole Mine. Number 6, Fibbage 3. Here we finally are at the 5-star games. These are party pack inclusions I would literally describe as perfect. Virtually zero hitches that hold it back. Fibbage 3 to me is like the perfect Fibbage experience. It has a phenomenal retro 70s looking presentation, the best music, seriously the Fibbage 3 theme is an absolute banger, and most importantly, the best round categories. The celebrity social media category about some dumb message or tweet a celebrity has sent out is really funny, although my favorite category is time to look at this, where you'll be shown some weird art piece or invention and need to come up with a lie about it. If you're going to play any version of Fibbage, definitely make it 3. Number 5, Dodo Re Mi. Pretty much the only game worth buying pack 10 for. This is best described as 9-player rock band. Most of the game happens on your device, and once the song ends, everyone's performance is synced up and played back, so that way the game can be played over streaming services like Discord. For merely being 1 out of 5 party pack inclusions, there's a surprising amount of content here. I mean, this is like a fully realized music game. You got a whopping 40 songs which are mostly pretty good, mind you, over 100 instruments, all of which sporting different difficulties and varying number of lanes. Then there's the slider instruments which aren't note-based at all and sound like this. Super funny, and in general, it all works really well. It's not inhibited by any sort of round or song limit. You can play for as long as you like, and players can both drop in or out at any time. Unlike many other Jackbox titles, there's no direct interaction, so if for that reason you don't care about this one, I totally get it. That being said, I reject the idea that likewise makes this a bad party game. People often consider stuff like Rock Band or Guitar Hero to be good party games despite no in-game interaction, and in a similar vein, if you're playing this in person, you get to hear everyone's instrument play from their phone in real time in sync with the song. I've definitely had just as much fun playing this in person as I've had playing stuff like Rock Band in the past. I probably wouldn't recommend Pack 10 itself, but if it ever goes on sale for under 20 bucks, I'd say it's worth picking up just for Dodo Re Mi. Number 4, Champed Up. The best drawing game in my opinion. Champed Up will prompt you to draw a champion, such as, draw the champion of the community pool. After you draw your thing, you will get sent someone else's drawing you will be competing against, but you won't know what prompt they had, so you just kind of have to wing it and draw something that seems vaguely similar. Drawings compete one-on-one in the arena, with players voting for which they think better fits the prompt. The presentation is just unbelievable in this game. The animations, the transitions, everything is so hype. Especially that soundtrack, like holy shit, it just pumps you up. This isn't necessarily a fault of the game, hence the 5 out of 5. But the only disclaimer I'd keep in mind is that better artists have a slight advantage here. In something like TKO, you don't have to be a good artist to do well, but I've noticed that unless the art's title was just like really good, people tend to vote for the better looking drawing in Champed Up, giving more art savvy players a distinct advantage. The drawing tools here are like really good. It's still the absolute best drawing UI in the series, I'd argue, making legitimately good art in a Jackbox game more viable, so the playing field won't be quite as level as some other drawing games. Champed Up is a fantastic time regardless, especially if you do consider yourself an artist. Number 3, Job. Quiplash, except instead of being able to type anything you want, you have to use words pulled from the responses of other players, forcing you to get a lot more creative in order to make something that works. If you don't play with literal children, and I don't mean that as a derogatory insult, I mean like, I played this with kids that were probably around 10 or so at a family gathering and it was literal hell. But yeah, as long as you don't play with kids, and everyone is competent enough to know that filling an answer with as many words as possible does not equal comedy, or more importantly, that a random assortment of words don't make a funny response, a response that is actually applicable to the prompt is a funny response, then this game is hilarious. I'm sure many of you are shocked to see me putting Job over something as iconic as Quiplash, but the thing is, all 3 Quiplash games have something that holds it back. Bad final rounds, bad music, bad prompts, whereas Job, for me at least, doesn't have anything that holds it back. Plus, Job easily has the highest effort to comedy ratio of any Jackbox game. The limitations make it a lot less taxing on players to come up with something, but rarely does it hinder the comedy itself. You can jump into Job half asleep and still come out with some funny answers. Oh, and that 10-player cap opposed to 8 is a pretty big deal. By far my favorite word entry game in any party pack. Trivia Murder Party 2. I mean, duh, right? I've met very few people who didn't like Trivia Murder Party, especially the sequel. Trivia Murder Party 2 was everything the original was, but better. Better presentation, better minigames, better sound design, cooler gimmicks like the gifts, secret endings. Hell, even the host sounds better. The final round saw a drastic change with the inclusion of the barrier. Basically, to make your final escape, you need to get all 3 answers correct. Having multiple players unable to escape because they keep messing up on the final question adds a ton of suspense to the finale. If you were to ask most people what their favorite Jackbox game is, I bet you at least half of them will tell you it's Trivia Murder Party. Again, I don't even really care for trivia all too much, and it's still my second favorite game. In fact, I almost ranked it number 1, but even though Trivia Murder Party is a crowd pleaser I can play with anyone, I couldn't rank it over my personal favorite. Number 1, Push the Button. This is not only my favorite Jackbox game, it's my favorite social deduction game. I prefer over Werewolves, Mafia, Town of Salem, Among Us. I love all types of social deduction games, and this is still easily my favorite. This is a 10-player game where certain players are secretly chosen to be aliens that need to blend in with all the human players. There's multiple testing rooms that range from drawing, to writing, to giving your opinion. The catch is that within these rooms, the prompt the aliens receive will be different from the prompts the humans get. For example, the humans may be asked to draw Pikachu, whereas the aliens will be asked to draw a magical raccoon. Alien prompts will differ more and more from human prompts the longer the game goes on. So with that Pikachu raccoon example, that's a more extreme difference you're not going to see until at least halfway through the game. However, aliens also have 2 hacks they can use that will give aliens a human prompt, or a human and alien prompt. The biggest counter to the hacks is the bioscanner test, which will relay to you the true identity to any player, and you can't hack your way out of that one. You have a finite amount of time to figure out who the aliens are until they completely take over the ship with their virus. So time management and not letting players dawdle on any particular test is really important. With the inclusion of the hurry up button, that lets you skip the timer completely if everyone votes to hurry. The pacing of the game is entirely dictated by the people playing, which is great. Once you think you know who the aliens are, it's time to push that button and vote out which players you suspect. Eject all the aliens and humans win, but if you even eject a single human, aliens win. The amount of polish here is insane, which I suppose makes sense. Push the Button had the longest development cycle out of any party pack inclusion to date. I mean, it was supposed to be in pack 4. Even just visually, I mean, just look at it. Extremely well-rendered 3D environments, models all rigged for animation, fantastic looking transitions, and cool UI with glitch effects. The 2 things that make Push my all-time favorite social deduction game are, 1, every player always has access to the same information. In something like Among Us specifically, so much of the game just boils down to he said, she said. If you just simply didn't see something and don't have any other information to go off of, you're pretty much forced to make a baseless 50-50. Not knowing something another player knows merely because you did not see it can never happen in Push because every player is always seeing every test result, and you can look through them at any time. And 2, everyone is always playing playing. I've heard people use this as a complaint against push, but the idea that this is a bad thing is absolutely absurd to me. Because going back to Among Us, how many games have you played where once someone gets voted out, they just leave the game? And that's because being out of the game sucks. The thing that makes these games fun is the discussion and the deception. And if you're out of the game, you can't contribute to either of those things. But in push, everyone is always in, and everyone always has a voice until it's over. Really, the lack of settings is basically the only critique I have. People unfamiliar with push to button seem to think that hacks are OP. I personally don't see it that way, since going "I was hacked" is basically the most suspicious thing you could possibly say. But if people need to simplify things for the sake of learning the game, they should be able to turn them off if they want. Although even that isn't much of a complaint within my own friend groups, because with the exception of 8-player games, I think the default settings for each group size is spot on, resulting in an equal amount of wins from both sides. Is push the button a game for everyone? Absolutely not. Which is why I almost ranked Trivia Murder Party as my #1 game. If you don't really care for social deduction games, and especially if you don't like games that can be intense or stressful, this likely won't click with you. But being completely honest with myself, this is the game I prefer. This is my all-time favorite Jackbox game. That's the ranking of each individual game, but what about the packs themselves? Which packs are the best and what should you buy? Well, if you're new to Jackbox and just want to know which ones to buy first, I always recommend starting with 3 or 7. For a more concise ranking, here's a grading scale I made for the ratings I gave in this video. The higher the star rating, the more points each individual game is worth, with it being heavily weighted towards games rated 4 or higher. I figured it made the most sense to weight it like that, since a pack with 2 bangers and 3 duds is a lot better than a pack with 5 just okay games. I mean, sure, the pack with 5 okay games might seem like the better value, but you're gonna load up the other pack way more just for one of those 2 games that you love. Based off this grading scale, this is the overall point value for every pack. Point-wise, packs 3 and 7 are tied for first, which should be no surprise. I'd personally recommend 3 over 7, but both of these are safe purchases. They're basically the only 2 packs everyone agrees are fantastic. At the bottom is pack 1, which should also be to no surprise. If you own any pack with a fibbage, you can pretty much skip this one outright. The only other game in pack 1 worth playing is Drawful, but you can just buy the superior Drawful 2 as a standalone, so I'd recommend doing that instead. As for the other packs, there's a lot of discourse among fans as to which ones are good and which ones you can skip. Based off what I said in this video, what you're looking at is how I would personally rank them. But I know that some people think pack 5 is the best, which I don't really care for, and others that think pack 8 was a bomb, which is a personal favorite of mine. It all just comes down to what types of games you enjoy. So when listening to my opinions, also make sure to consider what types of games you like if you need help determining what pack to get. But that's the ranking. This entire series was such an undertaking, so thank all of you that followed me on this Jackbox journey. Thanks for watching the reviews, thanks for watching the ranking, and until we see what the studio puts out next, I wish you all a wonderful evening. It is insane to me that we are finally all done with Jackbox. A huge thanks to patrons such as Pig the Pork, Alizard, Amanda Guth, Dave Marchese, Dave Pacheco, Drew Kellenberger, Evan Halbert, Ian, Kenzo Tien, Niji, Victoria Mars, Ralph W. Kelly, Some Crazy Idiot, and your boy Busby. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.
When I think of my last mistake, did you take